We're in week 2 of a series that we are entitling Jesus Felt, and we are studying what God's Word teaches us about emotions. When Callie announced that this was the series she was going to do, I think she announced it on Easter, and I knew that I was part of the teaching team, and eventually an email would come and say, John, would you be willing to give one of the sermons in this series? And I was like, oh, here it comes, the emotions series. This is not what I was built for. I'm much more of a thinker than a feeler. Emotional health has been a lifelong journey for me. Kristen loves the story of when we lived in Brussels, and we were working for a nonprofit and helping plant micro churches there, and we had a central staff member come in to do a team building day. And she said, we're just to get us going, kind of get the juices flowing, we're going to circle up. We're just going to do a little activity, just go around, just name an emotion. Just name an emotion. And she started over here and was like, happy, great, mad, sad, scared. Got to me, I was like, hungry. She's like, that's not an emotion. I'm like, really? I feel it a lot. I'm like, tired. Nope. She's like, those are physical states. I'm like, mad, sad, glad, scared. They used all the emotions. I'm like, pass, literally. I was like, what else is there? And then I watched 15 people around the circle name other emotions that I'm like, oh, I've heard of those things. Why do I not have vocabulary for emotions in my life? It's just not how I'm wired. And through many years of therapy, I've realized that kind of growing up as a child of multiple divorces in 2 different homes that were chaotic at times, that I just somehow internalized as a kid that there was really no space for my emotions in the chaos of the family that I was living in. There were a lot of other people's emotions that were kind of scary, and so my emotions I kept to myself. I just kind of stuffed them, repressed them, ignored them. And to be honest, I'm not sure that my 30 years being in kind of American churches has helped me deal with emotions any better. A lot of my experience in church has been that, we're kind of taught that the essence of being human and the essence of being a Christian is this emphasis on our spirituality over every other area of our life. And so we talk a lot about the spiritual life, but I hadn't heard a lot of sermons on emotional life or social life or even intellectual life, these other parts of us that are very much part of being human. And then if we did hear a series, or if I did kind of internalize some messages on emotions, it was basically always that feelings are bad, they can't be trusted, right? Proverbs says the heart is utterly deceitful, wicked, it is deceitful beyond all things, right? So that heart, that emotional place, that ups and downs, don't trust that. Don't make decisions based on that. And it's like, okay, all right, I'm going to stay in my head. I'm going to be thinking about God, not trying to feel myself through life. And so even if you then did have an emotion like sadness or weakness or despair, there seemed to be very little space in the church for that. My best friend Patrick, who I call Doc because he's a dentist, he and his wife lost their son at 6 years old, had a seizure in his sleep and passed away. And he had a condition, but they thought they had been managing it, and to wake up one morning and their son is gone. And they'll tell you to this day that the most painful things that were said to them in their grief were in the church, from people who were uncomfortable with their emotion and would try to give them these platitudes to try to make them feel better. And they didn't feel like the church was a safe space to feel what they were feeling. That to come on a Sunday, they had to feel happy and match everyone else. And they got to a point where it was really hard for them to reconnect with the church. And so in the course of my own kind of spiritual life since meeting Jesus as a 19-year-old, I've been kind of rediscipling myself in these last 10 years on emotional health through authors like Pete Scazzero and Larry Crabb, and Soong Chong Ra, who teaches over at Fuller, and I'm going to draw a lot on them today. So I love that we're doing a series on this, even for my own benefit. It always helps our marriage to be talking more openly about emotions. We got to the point with my own emotional stuntedness where we printed out like an emoji sheet of emotions, like just little faces. It's like 40 emotions, and my wife laminated it. It was on the fridge. And so we'd have these days where I'd come home and Kristen would be like, how you doing? You look like you're doing well. I'm like, I don't know. She's like, go get the sheet. And so I walk into the kitchen, I get the sheet. I'm like, this guy right here. I'm feeling frustrated. Is that what that is? She's like, any other emotions? Yeah, despondent. I like this guy right here. I'm just pointing to faces. And she's like, that's good, honey. You're growing. I literally pulled it off the fridge and then left it on the counter this morning. I was going to bring in our laminated sheet. So Callie reminded us last week that Jesus expresses emotions without shame, without embarrassment. He has this incredible freedom to let the world know how he's feeling. In the text, we see Jesus being joyful, angry, sad. It says he feels astonishment and wonder. He feels distress. There are times where he is disturbed and deeply moved. Twice we see him weeping, including in our text today. The Gospels say that he longed to be with his disciples. He felt compassion for the crowds and for those that were sick. He's modeling that to be human is to be an emotional being. And so this week, the emotion that I want us to look at is the emotion of grief. And Jesus felt grief. And our text is from John chapter 11. And I'm going to read a big portion of it. But I thought, I was mentioning this to TD. I'm like, TD, I said, let's just do something different, right? We're trying to raise our own emotional awareness. We're trying to get better language. So as I read the text, when you sense that one of the characters in the text, okay, is feeling an emotion, just do this real quick. Just kind of put your hand up for kind of, just a half second, just to signal it, and then put it back down. And just keep track in your own mind. There's no right answer. I haven't scanned this, But this is just for you to be like, oh, I hear that. That's an emotion. Put it up, put it back down. Let's see how many emotions pop up in this story. John chapter 11. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now someone's angry that Jesus didn't get there a little quicker. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. And when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who has come into the world. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said. He's asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to go to the tomb to mourn there. And when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? How many did you have? This is my wife, so I married the emotional, intelligent person. More than 5? More than 10? Yeah? I heard some anger in there, heard some compassion. What else? What other emotions did you sense that jumped out? Just sadness, love, frustration. Yeah. When Martha's out but Mary's at home, I almost wonder if she's feeling kind of a resentment. I'm not going out to talk to him. He could have done something. He didn't do it. Pain. Yeah. The last emotion there, this great piece of Bible trivia, the shortest verse in the entire Bible, 11:35, Jesus wept, period. Jesus is feeling grief. My coach, who's been helping me process grief in my life these last couple years, had a great definition that has stuck with me. He says, grief is anything you wish had been more, better, or different. Grief can be triggered by pain, loss, or suffering of any kind. And let's be honest, I think grief is a lot more common than we even think about. I mean, all of life brings change, right? And all change involves some level of loss. And all loss brings grief. So anytime we're going through changes and losses in life, we have opportunities to be triggered in this feeling of grief. And grief, of course, it exists on a spectrum. On one side are the unfathomable, unspeakable pains like the loss of a child or loss of a spouse or being victimized by some form of abuse. And then on the other side are kind of more of the milder feelings of loss and deep disappointment that are much more day to day. Maybe it's the loss of the sadness of an unfulfilled dream that you've been carrying for a long time, or the betrayal of a friend who you thought had your back, or even just the isolation and loneliness of modern life that you wish would be different than it is. And grief shows up sometimes as sadness and anger, but grief also can show up as cynicism and despair, this feeling of like, I got hurt and I will not get hurt again. I will not trust again. I will not love again. I will not have any faith again. That sort of cynicism, that self-protection is another way that grief expresses itself. We don't choose grief. Grief comes to us naturally in life, but we do have a choice in how we deal with it. But I think the more you kind of look at the messages of a secular society around us, you realize that our society is not helping us respond to grief well. In an increasingly secular society, the goal of removing kind of God's activity from the world, one of the results of that is that the highest goal, it seems, of secular society is to prevent suffering. It's to ensure happiness, to make it available in the marketplace, that you can buy it, you can experience it. Traditionally, cultures believe that pain and suffering was the result of evil, and that the evil was to be addressed and eliminated, but that the suffering had value. But in our culture now, the suffering itself has become the evil. And so the goal is not just to eliminate the evil that causes suffering, the goal is to eliminate the feeling of suffering that we might even have. Try to prevent it, eliminate it. If you can't do those things, at least find a way to numb it and to check out and make sure that it's not too painful. And so in this secular view where the material world is all you have, it seems like the meaning of life is just to choose a life that gives you the freedom to be the most happy, to ensure happiness at all time. And then the only thing that suffering does is prevent us from feeling happiness. It gives us pain and discomfort, and so the whole goal is to try to get rid of it. And so if you are someone who's feeling suffering, you do get the messages like my friends did when they went to church of like, oh gosh, you're still feeling that? Well, God needed another angel in heaven, or God works all things together for good because the suffering that you're feeling is so uncomfortable for me and must be for you, and so let's try to get you back to being happy. It's an inhumane response to someone's emotional reality. But it's what our society is teaching us to escape grief. Now compare that modern perspective to the beautiful ancient practice, the Jewish practice of sitting Shiva. If you've heard of this. Shiva is just the Hebrew word for 7. So it literally means to sit for 7 days. So when you lost a family member, a loved one, to sit Shiva meant that for 7 days after the burial, you would stay at home in an act of mourning. And you'd receive guests and they'd bring food over so that you didn't have to cook, and they would try to comfort and console you. And you would express your memories of the person you had lost. You would share in your grief publicly. There were beautiful little traditions in the Jewish culture of sitting Shiva where you would drape a black cloth over all the mirrors in your home so that you were not tempted to think about your own appearances. It's not about you right now. It's not about how you look. People coming up, they don't care what you're dressed like. You know, they be authentic with who you are. Don't be consumed with your own appearances even. And so this whole process of sitting Shiva was meant to slow the mourner down and make sure that they didn't return to life too soon. And so the sitting Shiva practice, after 7 days, it actually then stepped down to a 31-day period, a whole month of less mourning. But you still remembered. And then for the next 11 months, you would offer the mourner's prayer twice a day, at morning and at night. And then after the end of the year, you would ritually remember that dead person on the day that they passed away. 7 days, 31 days, an entire year, and then a lifelong form of remembrance. Ancient societies taught us to embrace grief, not escape it. And I think it's pretty clear in this text which approach Jesus is engaging in, which is the more human response. I mean, the reality is, now that we know how the story ends, and I didn't even cut it off, but he eventually will raise Lazarus from the dead and restore him. Jesus could have shown up to these crying women and said, ladies, stop crying. It's okay. Oh, come here, wipe that tear, stop crying. Watch this, and bring him back and be like, ta-da, he's back. Honestly, as a fixer, as a thinker, that's probably how I would have responded to it. Oh gosh, you're sad. How do I get you to stop being sad? Well, let me bring him back and fix your problems, and then the sadness goes away. But that's an inhumane response. What he actually does is he realizes they're crying. I'm sad that I've lost him too. In this moment right now, he's gone. And so he feels his sadness, he weeps, and he weeps with them. And I love the whole Jesus wept period, because it's just a way of saying he stopped everything and just met them in their emotion. He's modeling that the cure for our pain, paradoxically, is by engaging in it, not trying to run from it. And so he empathizes with them in their grief. He feels it rather than suppressing it. And then the rest of this story, I think, gives this beautiful pattern that is throughout the Bible for how do we engage with grief. And Scripture describes kind of three biblical practices to process grief and sorrow. The first is pay attention to the pain by putting it in words and embodying it. The second is to kind of wait in the confusion in between. And then finally, allow the old to birth the new. And that's what happens with Lazarus' resurrection. To pay attention to our pain, to put our grief into words. The biblical term for that is lament. And Callie mentioned last week, there's an entire book of the Bible called Lamentations, which is nothing but laments of people experiencing pain and sorrow. But you know that not only is there one book about lament, but that when you get to the Psalms, the prayer Psalms, 40% of the Psalms, which are the emotional expressions of life, right? When it's like a musical, when life gets so powerfully emotional that you have to start singing the things, you can't just talk. That's what musicals are. They're plays where people feel powerful emotions and they burst into song to try to express themselves, right? That's what the book of Psalms is. It's life bursting forth into song because the emotion is so powerful. 40% of the book are Psalms of lament. It's as if the Bible is saying 40% of your daily emotions are probably going to be sadness and grief and loss. The irony is, compare that, Soong-Chan Rah mentions this in his book, he says, compare that to a study that someone had done where they looked up, CCLI is the Christian Copyright Association, that basically if every song we sung, you have to have a CCLI license to sing it. And someone went through all the CCLI worship songs in the entire database and found what percentage of them were songs of sadness and suffering? 13%. Especially in the white Western culture. There's such a pressure to be kind of happy-clappy in everything we do. I mean, I've even been at churches that have taught on suffering, taught on pain, and the whole service is kind of down. Then the last song is like, we're rocking out. Hey, have a great week, everyone. It's like, oh, I'm going out in the world. I can't be sad anymore. We're so afraid to kind of leave people in that place. Actually, black and brown communities are so much better at doing this, sadly, because the experience has been one that has had to embrace grief and sadness and sorrow because of factors outside of their control often. The purpose of lament is to give us permission, to give us the tools. A lament is a passionate expression of sorrow or suffering. We lament because things are not as we long for them to be with God in control. And so this invitation to lament is meant to be for our own health. We get our pain out through words rather than stuffing them. If we repress them, it hurts us. And if we do the other natural thing, which is take our emotion and lash out at someone else, it hurts them. So God is almost saying, hey, I'm big enough to handle it. Bring it on. Tell it to me. Don't stuff it inside. Don't yell at a friend in anger. Come to me with all of that emotion. My shoulders are big enough. And that's exactly what the Psalms of Lament are. It's people who feel the freedom to grieve and express their pain to God, even their anger and their frustration. There's a sense of disorientation that they're experiencing. Psalm 13, one of the famous Psalms of Lament, David says over and over again, "How long, Lord?" The Message translation is my favorite. He says, "Long enough, God, you've ignored me long enough. I've looked at the back of your head long enough. Long enough. I've carried this ton of trouble. I've lived with a stomach full of pain. Long enough, my arrogant enemies have looked down their noses at me." The irony is that there's still a part of me that often hears these Psalms of lament and goes, "Oh gosh, God's going to be angry that you're yelling at him." And instead, God's like, no, bring it. This is my path for your health. You need to get this out. What you don't get out in words, you will act out in sin. So get it out right now. Bring it on. Tell me everything you're feeling. Express it. The truth must be told. This is what life feels like right now. And that's the real value of lament, is that we put it into words. We live in this disorientation, but it brings us into God's presence. Psychologists will tell you that when a person's in pain, what they need most is for someone to pay attention to their pain. When a little kid scratches their hand, and it's just a little mark, and they go to their mom, "Dad, I think I need a Band-Aid. I cut myself." As a parent, they don't actually need a Band-Aid. It's fine. But what they're really saying is, "I'm in pain. Will you be with me in my pain? Do you see my pain?" And what they're really checking is, when I have a bigger pain, will you be there with me? And when you as a parent go, "Oh my goodness, well, we need to clean that and put a Band-Aid on it," and you pay attention to them and you comfort them and you put the little Band-Aid on, maybe you offer them a prayer and you say, "Are you okay? All right, do you think you can get back out there and play?" "Yeah, okay." That kid runs away, and for the rest of that day, that Band-Aid, it's not about the healing. My pain matters to my mom and dad. They see me in my pain. Someone attached to me in my pain, and that is how we begin to heal. What we really need in our grief is to have that compassionate companion, someone like Jesus in this story who's willing to cry with us, to sit with us, to not rush us through it, to not just say, "You're fine, get over it, get back out there." And that's what Jesus is doing. He's crying with them, and he's ready to cry with us in any of our pain that we may be carrying today. And the beauty of the biblical narrative, as you read from Old Testament through to New Testament, is that the reason that God can be trusted in our suffering is that God himself has experienced suffering. God is a sovereign God who's fully in control, but he's also a God who experiences suffering. In the Old Testament, you see God the Father suffering over the rebellion of his people in Israel. Jesus here weeps in sadness. He will weep at his death as he suffers the pain of crucifixion. One of the most incredible things is that in his resurrected body, the body that is ready for the new kingdom to come, he still has the wounds. It's as if he's saying, even my suffering has value, and it's been redeemed. It hasn't been eliminated, it's been transformed into something of value. Suffering is not only the way Christ became like us when he entered into humanity in the incarnation, but it's also the way he redeemed us, that he took on suffering because there can be some value in suffering. And then the New Testament says that in the same way Christ became like us in our sufferings, that one of the ways we become like Christ is by joining him in his sufferings. Is that we follow him and recognize that the path of Christ is a path that will involve pain and loss and grief. And despite all the painfulness, it's also a path that can have purpose and lead to redemption. The message of Jesus' embrace of suffering is that suffering is not just a destructive force in life that tears down, it's actually a creative force that builds up. So Paul will write in Romans 5, we glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces endurance. And endurance produces character, and character produces hope. But to be shaped by that suffering, we have to submit to it. We can't try to run from it or try to hide. We have to be willing to lean into it, to experience it. And once we experience those emotions, to get them out and express them and share them with others in healthy ways. And when we do that, when we embrace suffering, that's where the creative force comes alive, and we begin to realize there can be something redemptive that can come on the other end. That's not what you tell someone when they're just started suffering. You don't tell them, "Don't worry, God will work this all together for you." Let them come to that on their own. You just tell them, "This sucks, and I'm so sorry you're going through this, and I will sit here quietly with you as long as you want." But eventually, as you journey with that person, the prayer, the hope, the belief is that eventually it can have a redemptive purpose. In fact, maybe we're all familiar with the author Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who made famous kind of the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I remember going through that when my fraternity brother committed suicide my sophomore year. Also, what, this could never have happened, and then how did this happen, and then almost kind of bargaining with God in it, and then the sadness, and then eventually coming around and accepting it. But you know that later on, less publicized, she added a 6th stage of grief. The 6th stage is finding meaning. Meaning often comes when we realize that the comfort we have found from God, in the comfort we've received from others, actually now becomes a resource that God's entrusted to us that we can use to help others. 2 Corinthians 1 tries to make this point. It's as if comfort there's an economy of comfort, and it's a currency that God gives to us that we can give to others. Listen to how Paul describes this. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ. If we are distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer. And our hope for you is firm, because we know that just as you share in our sufferings, so also you share in our comfort. Anytime God gives you a resource and then says, use this resource to bless others in my kingdom, we call that stewardship. And we talk a lot about stewardship over time, talent, and treasures. But Paul's making the point here that we are also called to steward our pain. That your pain, your suffering is not just for you. That as long as you experience God's comfort, you've now been given something that you have responsibility to offer to others, which is part of why it's so important that we go through the healing process in a healthy way. Because if we don't, as the body of Christ, then what God is saying is there's a world of people out there who need my comfort, and they're not going to receive it in a tangible way unless you receive it and hand it to them. We find meaning in our grief when we learn to steward our pain in service of others. And to the degree which we grieve our own losses, that becomes the degree to which we can express compassion to others. I'm going to invite the band to come up now as we prepare for kind of our reflection time. And often in our time here, we ask kind of what the Spirit might be saying to us. And I thought I might even just introduce you to a simple little emotional intelligence activity that my coach has led me through in these last 2 years. And we'll put up on the screen kind of this little diagram. This is something you could draw on the back of a prayer card, or even the offering envelope is a clean space. If you don't have a journal, or if you have a notes app maybe on your phone, you could pull that up. But this is a practice that I've been going through, just drawing a line down the middle of a piece of paper, and on the left, naming some losses. This is the acknowledgement stage. Just name some things in your life right now that you wish had been more, better, or different. All of your pain's valid. This is not a Prussian Olympics. You don't have to show it to the person next to you. You might say, oh, that's not a big deal. If it was a big deal to you, it's a big deal. This does not have to be pain and suffering on a global scale, but just articulate and acknowledge your own experience of loss. And then on the right side, think about that experience and say, what am I feeling about that loss? Name the emotion. Express the disappointment. Where do you even feel it in your body? Is it like a tension in your chest? Is it like a knot in your stomach? Does it make your shoulders tight when you think about it? Just be in tune with the emotional response to that loss. And then as you look at that and you acknowledge the losses and you're attuned to the losses, then the final part, that attachment part, invite God to be your compassionate companion in that. Invite God to come sit with you. Say, Jesus, you were able to weep with those women. Would you join me in this reality that I'm in right now? I need you to attend to me, attach to me in my pain so that I know I'm not alone. And if that feels hard, if you sit and do that, you don't feel like God's doing it, then get with some of God's people and say, hey, can I go through this chart with you? And would you just help sit with me and attach to me in this? It may not be the biggest thing, but would you just help put a Band-Aid on it so I know that I'm not alone in this pain? And Jesus is inviting us today not to avoid our grief, but to move toward it. Our pain is not the problem. Our problem is our relentless determination to avoid our pain or get over our pain at any cost. As Joseph Campbell says, the great story writer, all the heroes that we respect, they recognize that the treasure you most seek is in the cave you most fear. That the obstacle we're trying to get around, that is the path. That the pain, entering into the pain, is the way forward. That the way through grief is not to forget about it or avoid it, it's to feel it and embrace it. And so even this morning, let's begin to do that in our time of reflection.